Good morning, everybody, and I'd like to extend our deepest gratitude to Mark for his opening comments for our conference this year. I'd also like to say thank you to Kathy for her opening comments and for her years of dedicated work towards advancing practice. So thank you. And now it gives me great pleasure to welcome Beverly Harden, MBE, Deputy Chief Allied Health Professions Officer and National Lead for Multi-Professional Advanced and Consultant Practice within NHS England. So welcome, Beverly, to our virtual stage.
Lovely, Helen. Thank you so much indeed. I'm delighted to be with you here today, so thank you ever so much for inviting me. And I want to start by saying, Kathy Haig, you are an incredible leader, my friend. I'm so grateful for the leadership that you have shown. Standing on the shoulders of the giants before Katrina McLean, yourself, you have driven such a fundamental step change for us in the education of advancing practice and a real wraparound support. Nothing that happens could happen without AAPE. Your team, the tireless service of colleagues across the executive and beyond is absolutely the mainstay of the work that we do. So thank you, Kathy, and I wish you a fabulous retirement. I want to continue with the thank yous, if that's okay, to be really clear about the fact that the work we do is the product of everybody's genius across the country and across the UK, and increasingly working with global colleagues. So thank you so much. As I AAPE, we could do nothing that we do without you. Incredibly grateful. HEI colleagues, our academic, our research colleagues, thank you. Your flexibility, your leadership, the work you have done to support us to continue to think through the challenges, the opportunities of advanced practice. We remain in the foothills of the work is still to be done, but incredible distance travelled. And the magic is that we've travelled that distance together. And that is such an important part of underpinning the education, the training of advancing practice, and for service, a real understanding of how we start to understand, utilise, deploy, optimise the huge opportunity that is advanced practice. So service leads, the work you are doing is incredible to work through, understand, work through the weeds. Everywhere we turn, there is a new challenge. So I warn you, the chances of me getting through the challenges in half an hour are, we've scraped the surface today. It's the beginning. The magic is we work together as a community looking at those challenges. And the fact that we've got the NMC, the other regulators wrapped around this agenda too, is incredible. They've been with us all the way through in the journey, and the fact we've now got this incredible opportunity for a stop and a think is such an important part of the evolution of advanced practice. So thank you to our regulators for your absolute togetherness with us on this journey. You've been here, I say, right from the beginning. Massively important now that we stand in support of the work that is happening and to really take the opportunity to think. And that's going to be the absolute theme of my half an hour, is the opportunity we have here is to stop and to think, not to go with the emotion of the moment, but to stop and to think and to really understand what is in the best interest of people, populations, and those that we serve. Other thank yous, I want to thank the incredible Centre for Advancing Practice team, our incredible regional teams. We are changing the world together with all of you, one conversation at a time, as we help people understand, realise the opportunity, but also the safe and effective governance of advanced practice. So the teams that are working together in England, incredible, and again, teams in Scotland, Ireland and Wales, working tirelessly to really advance this agenda. And we are working together in the background, nowhere near as we would want to. We talk occasionally. The aim for the next phase of this is how we work better together. And had we not had our attention slightly taken with a merger, we would have been deep into conversations that we had started at the turn of the year. So colleagues, we are absolutely intending to continue those conversations together now that the dust is settling as we move into NHS England. The other thank you I want to say is very clearly to Hallam Medical. The fact that you have been able to open to colleagues free access membership to, for us, one of the most important professional organisations that we work with is absolutely incredible. So thank you. That is amazing. That really does change the dial on people being able to actively engage across the university sector, but also wider into service, thinking through the educational aspects of what we do, and also to drive multi-professional uptake. So we end up with a really representative conversation conversation. And one thing AAPE have done so well is to really work through and understand how we keep a conversation that transcends professional boundaries and is centered in what service and populations need for advanced practice. So thank you so much, Helen Medical. Really, really appreciate it. So if I could move on, move my own slides, Beverly, come on, get with the program, Beverly. So before the pandemic, we spent £35 million in Health Education England on the education and training of advanced practice. We're now training 1,000 people a year more than we did at that point. So this is a huge investment of public money. So HEE, as was, and now NHS England's role in all of this work has absolutely been about how do we offer assurance of the education and training that we pay for on behalf of service to make sure that it drives forwards the safe and effective care for patients through the medium of the education and training. We have no other jurisdiction in that space at all. And the key consideration for all of us, and in the regulatory space, absolutely, is public safety and confidence. And I think the challenge for the regulation conversation here is that is the phraseology that underpins our statutory regulation. There is so much more that underpins that than statutory regulation, and we will touch on that over the period of the next 24 minutes. But when you read the Nuffield report, and I do commend you, if you did nothing else, if I'm feeling a bit boring already, turn it off, go and read the Nuffield report. It is an excellent report on people's understanding, people's thinking, the opportunities, the challenges of regulation. It is an incredibly good report. It doesn't overlay any of the emotion that we all feel. This is an incredibly emotive agenda for all of us. We all know what we think. The challenge is, if this doesn't tell us what we think, then it must be wrong. And that is not the case. We have got to trust the process of our regulatory colleagues fishing through the opportunity and the challenge of regulation here. And the Nuffield report is absolutely worth a cup of coffee, a good read, and inform yourself of the challenges and the opportunities. So thank you, Luella and team. A really lovely piece of work. What comes through the report, and Alison Leary did some work for us in the early days of our advanced practice work in NHS England, was looking at the how can we start to get a feel for the patient safety considerations of advanced practice. Alison did a huge amount of work looking at coroner's reports. There was a piece of work done in other professional groupings in podiatry and other areas looking for those patient safety considerations. So we could start to make the case for understanding the safety of what we're doing. Huge amounts of research data beginning to come through now looking at patient safety data, and a really important part of the evidence base for what we do, but incredibly challenging also to present that data. And it's not just a problem for advanced practice. We work with the sonography emergent profession of primary registration sonographers, and there is no statutory regulation. And you think of the challenge of sonography and the challenge of presenting patient safety data there. Again, there is very little patient safety data, but we know the risk, we know the challenges. And here, with the autonomy of, and that's a funny word, the autonomy word, but with the independence, the responsibility of decision making that the advanced practitioners are making every minute of every day, and the increased level of exposure for colleagues, even those who are autonomous on graduation, some of the allied health professionals, midwives, etc., huge challenge in the responsibility of the complexity and the real step up in expertise required of advanced practice. So even if this is something we can't find at the moment, it will become more visible. There will be that front page headline. Again, they've had them before, but there'll be a front page headline in a daily newspaper that says the Nocta strikes again. And please don't tweet that. None of this is helpful debate to be having in a public domain. This is our professional challenge about how do we make sure that we do not have test cases of individuals being caught up in the fact that we haven't done the housekeeping necessarily, as we all, as partners in the delivery of safe and effective advanced practice, need to be paying attention to constantly about how do we make sure that we have got our total house in order from a governance perspective. So today I'm going to liberally move the word from regulation into governance, because it is one of many slices of keeping services safe. So the context that we are operating in within advanced practice. This is an incredibly complex agenda, incredibly complex agenda. It's hard enough if we were just doing one profession. And there's many a day I wake up and think, oh, I wish I just looked after physiotherapy. I could do this. This would be so simple. I could do it. Oh my gosh. And here we are. We have nursing, we have midwifery, we have the 15 allied health professions. We have scientists, we have pharmacists, we have psychologists, we have colleagues coming new into the regulatory space over time. We have got such a complex environment. However, we have got to be able to find a way that enables us to liberate the level of practice, of advanced practice, to our services, to our populations, because we need it. We see the brilliance of it everywhere we go. We also see the challenge of not getting it right. But I want to take us into, I'm going to spend some time in this first bullet point because I think this is incredibly important. Incredibly important. I want us to think through very clearly through this next few years of pause and think whilst we look at the opportunities for regulation. We've got to be really clear what on earth is advanced practice. What are we talking about? We can't even decide often. And I can have a conversation with 7 different people in a room and come out with 7 different opinions about what we're talking about. That's the essence of our challenge here. So I want to deconstruct some of this work. So the word clinical in the framework, one of the biggest, hottest debates that we had was, is it advanced practice framework, multi-professional advanced practice framework? Is it the advanced multi-professional clinical practice framework? That word clinical was debated for there'll be several people sniggering in the background of the call who remember the heated debate around the word clinical. And at that time, the word clinical was used to underpin the fact that this was happening within a clinical, i.e. health environment. And I mean health in the widest undertaking. By clinical professionals, probably is the best example of that. So you may be a nurse working in social care, in health, in learning disability, wherever you are, clinical means that you are a clinician working in a space. That was the use of the word clinical. Over time, this became spirited off into being a thing. Advanced clinical practitioner became a medical substitute, became whatever it was going to be in the eyes of people who wanted a quick fix to some very acute workforce shortfall challenges. But the debates that happened through at that time was, does clinical extend to working in a laboratory? You might be a pharmacist doing the most incredibly advanced work, making decisions around, the chemotherapy or whatever you might be offering. Is that advanced clinical practice? We've just had recently the nursing digital work being discussed. Is that advanced practice? If you're a digital leader, can you advance your practice in that space? Where do we sit with research, leadership, education, etc.? What is the boundary of this thing called advanced practice? Is it clinical? Is it actually purely a physical health acute assessment piece with mental health attached to it? Can it therefore be? Do you see what I mean? The real challenge of what is it? What is the advanced practice piece? And the challenge for us is that if we're going to be moving into a space of better regulation, we're very clear. This is an advanced level of practice that liberates our primary scope of practice as the clinicians that we are to be able to deliver our expertise. It's our journey of novice to expert. And the really fascinating part of this is about scope of practice. What is this? And I loved seeing in the Nuffield report. And reading the Nuffield report was one of the best bits of therapy I've had for a long time, to be frank, because it played through wonderfully and unemotionally the real reality of the situation we feel. But the challenge for us is, how do we make sure that we are really understanding modern scope of practice? So as you know, the other half of my job, I work with allied health professions, and we are doing a huge piece of work at the moment to understand what is the 21st century scope of practice of a therapeutic radiographer or a podiatrist. What is it? Is it what it was when we wrote them last time, 10 years ago? Is it something more dynamic? Where are the boundaries of 21st century practice, which then is underpinned by indemnity, understanding by employers, and utilisation of colleagues across the piece. But also then, we'll talk later about what people can do in their job roles. So if we're looking at governance, we've got to put in place the governance of advancing practice that can understand the ability to look after somebody who may be working in a highly acute setting, in a surgical ward potentially, in a very multi-professional role, underpinned by good governance in a trust, right the way through to a colleague who's working in a clinical space as a clinician. You might be a speech and language therapist or a mental health nurse working in a criminal justice environment with clients with learning disability and autism, and doing some incredibly complex clinical interventions and advocacy for that person in that space, working at advanced clinical practice level. But it bears no resemblance at all to the surgical advanced practitioner. And actually, the training will need to bear no resemblance to each other, except the common core of training that holds us together. And this is what's really, and again, forgive me, I was asked to be a bit provocative. I'm being provocative. Next year, I want you to invite me back to ask me, if I ruled the world, what would I do? And then we can take provocation to a whole new level. But we'll save that excitement for another year. But we have got to think about liberating. And this means we've got to grapple with things that we might not understand. So I have the utter privilege of working across every single professional group, from optometrists to neurosurgeons and everything in between. But that means we also see clearly what we don't know about each other. We understand practice through the lens of what we know. We have got to understand advanced practice through the art of the possible, the art of the opportunity, which means we're going to have to grapple with stuff we fundamentally maybe do not recognize, don't understand, because we have a very clear perspective on what we think it is. So it's a real challenge for us all. And in that context, the issue here for us is this should not be medical substitute. This should be the advancement of our core clinical scope of practice and the ability to move. And there will be points where we move beyond that. And that's where we've got to spend time over the next few years really thinking through what is the movement beyond scope of practice and how do we regulate in that space. And the Health and Care Professions Council for Podiatry have an annotation on their register for podiatric surgeons, because that is a step outside of, it is recognised as scope of practice, but a step outside of their core space. It works well. It's an established way, but it's a very, very specific field of practice. So we're going to have to think through all this stuff. We have to have no preconceptions as we move into this space. And the fact that we have someone like Sam Foster from the NMC leading this work is wonderful. Sam is an incredible leader. And I think the challenge for us all is to make sure we are wrapped around the agenda, around Sam and around the work in full thoughtful pursuit of the right outcome, not the outcome we might think we want today. Because the cat is well and truly out of the bag on this one. We have got advanced practice everywhere. It's not like prescribing, where I was talking to Julian yesterday, and he'll say, well, with prescribing, we started from scratch. Indeed, we did. We don't start from scratch here. We start with decades of experience across the different professions, different ways of operating. And what we've done in England together is start to put in place some of the housekeeping. And the plan always was with the regulators is, we're doing this now. At some point, you will move into the space. Fantastic, we're here now. The issue for us now then is, so how do we keep the housekeeping going so there is actually something that would be regulatable, visible, seeable? When we started back in 2017, we weren't in the space we are now. We can now see it and put our arms around it, and we now know what the next questions are. So fantastic to then be working closely with colleagues. So there are huge numbers of different responsibilities to fill it here. We must not think that regulation lets the employer off the hook. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And we've got some huge confounders. Protection of title, we've got to work through here. What are the real issues? It's just like doing a patient safety investigation back at work. It's a root cause analysis of what are the real challenges we're trying to sort here, and move aside the bits that do need attention, but are not part of this piece of work, because it will confound our ability to absolutely laser sharp into what we need to do. Because our employers need one approach for all. If we just zip forwards 10 years' time, if we regulate in a very strong way one profession, then you can see a point in 10 years' time where people say, well, I'm really sorry, I can't have anybody else but this one profession doing this job because they aren't regulated. And we'd all say now, no, of course it won't happen. It'll be voluntary or whatever, but it won't be. It'll become a thing. And for some colleagues, the physios might say, fantastic, brilliant. That means MSK becomes our domain. Wonderful. Everybody else out. At last, physio rules the world. And I can only say that because I am a physio. But that's not in the best interest of patients, because in that space, I want to see nurse colleagues, I want to see medical colleagues, I want to see physio colleagues, I want to see osteopath colleagues, I want to see a variety of different colleagues offering their USP in. Our OTs offer an incredibly important aspect to MSK services. It would not be the domain only of the physio. So we've really got to think through how we get to a point of understanding training routes. We're doing that work together. What is warranted and what is unwarranted variation, and really start to think through, because if we make something too tough, the employers will just work around it. Instead of advanced practitioners, we'll have super duper specialists, or whatever we want to call them. We'll make a new generation of thing to avoid the rules. We do it every time. But we need good governance, and we've got to be able to make sure that we keep our eye on what are we trying to achieve and hit that spot, not miss the point in the process. So huge amounts to do. Now, you'll get these slides, so please don't worry. This gives you an idea of the numbers of advanced practitioners that we can find on ESR. We've done a huge amount of work cleansing the data. It's still not right, but it's getting there. And you see good growth, good in interesting numbers of different, don't even try and engage with the detailed slide, as I say, you'll get it. What's fascinating so we've got about 8,500 kicking around in various different levels of training or delivery into consultant practice in the NHS. This is ESR data, March 23rd, from the NHS. This is primary care, where we have a far greater variation in what is considered advanced in that space currently. So please don't take from these graphs any level of data. There's a huge piece of work that needs to be undertaken around underpinning not only the training pathways and the understanding for primary care, and you've got full-time equivalent there and headcount being your two different graphs. A useful reminder, we may train 1,000, but actually we may need 2,000 if most of our workforce are working in a part-time capacity. So just some interesting asides for you from the data. But we're talking challenges here. None of this is new. The fact we have 4 nation frameworks, I just want to remind colleagues that when we wrote ours, we were the 3rd, 4th out of the blocks, I think. We copied everybody else's. We referenced them all beautifully and appropriately. We have one common core. We're not far away from each other. Yes, we use different language, but we're just making ourselves feel, well, we made ourselves feel important by changing some words, to be frank, to make sure that it wasn't plagiarism in the most inappropriate form. So I would argue we're not far away from each other. In the HCPC work, they agreed to come together and work with colleagues to create common definition. Our policy team has wrapped around that work and helping. So we will work on with that. We've been distracted, as I say, by merger, but 4 nation colleagues, we really want to get back round the table and find out where do we land together. Not England telling people, but the 4 of us, as ever, coming together as a community to work out where do we have an overarching position and where do we look different. It doesn't matter, but it would help enormously the more we work together. And I think we've all found our feet now. We're probably all able now to get back together again and really understand what we do together well. Is this a uni-professional, multi-professional piece? We need to find, in England, it will be multi-professional. And I don't mean sludge. I mean, it allows every profession the same level of inclusivity in the conversation, the same level of opportunity, and we start to level the playing field so that employers can pull from their recruitment pool of the skills and capabilities they require. And it's not about challenging professional boundaries. It's not about challenging identity. We value and respect, but actually in teams, we often need a variety of different skill sets coming together. And we do Venn diagram together as professions where we have got shared skills and unique skills. And we tend to capitalize on our unique skills. We need to be more proud, if that's even English, of our shared skills too, as we go into that space and our extension of practice. We've got to build understanding. We've got very small specialty areas. We need to think about how we work across 4 nations there. The huge challenge with pinning down credentials for us has been we can do big volume, we can't do small volume, but nor can we leave small volume behind. So we just got to get cleverer how we think through small volume. What professions can do what? We've got huge disparity, which is a patient safety issue, I believe, around prescribing, etc., etc. So I have Michael Guthrie coming back to join us, who was in the centre, to do a short piece of work on who can do what, who can't do what do they need to be able to do, what's enshrined in law, what's just custom and practice like imaging requesting or listing for surgery, and how do we liberate the professions over time with ministers to be able to drive a more equitable approach to what people can do. Titles, huge challenge. Employers are very clear, they need flexibility. If you're working in a ward setting, back to our surgical example, you may want to use the title advanced clinical practitioner because you have multiple different professionals exercising the same job role with the same training, but using their core skills, but they are there in that. They might be an advanced practitioner, advanced clinical practitioner, physiotherapist, fantastic, nurse, whoever, doesn't matter. In another environment like primary care, I may have a suite of rooms. I might have got a podiatrist in one room, a nurse in the other, a paramedic in the other, and an occupational therapist or dietitian in the other one. I absolutely want to know who's behind each door, because if I don't, I cannot safely deploy patients into those rooms because they have a different level of scope of practice. So we must be really mindful that titles need to be understood and flexed. I understand the protection of the advanced practice piece, but that needs to be really clearly thought through around the foreseen and unforeseen consequences of pinning down titles too dramatically. Funding, that's a country issue, and I think increasingly funding will follow because of the nature of people see the opportunity of this. And the other levels of practice piece, the magic of the work that's been done around enhanced practice with Alison and the team, is that we've suddenly been able to give people a recognisable structural part of the journey, however being really clear that actually it exists already, we're just giving it a name, we're just giving it a bit of space. So very, very important part of we'll see a settling down of advanced practice as people start to understand the magic that that enhanced level practice will offer. And we also need to understand the impact of things like the new NMC standards for pre-reg training and modernisation of other curricula to be really clear that scope of practice will continue to evolve. Understanding is everything. Just read through the list. I don't need to go through the list. Everybody needs a better understanding. And if we achieve nothing else from the conversations we're having today and over the next few years whilst regulation is being debated, that we have a common narrative across countries, across professions, across regulators, across professional bodies that says this is what advanced practice is. And you know what, everybody? You all have got a governance responsibility here. Here's the understanding. You think about scope, you underpin that with indemnity, you underpin that with a really good understanding and service. We then start to move on a very different narrative. And the challenge for me of regulation, you must forgive me, I had to put a picture in here somewhere, is that regulation is one tiny slice in our Swiss cheese. And I don't mean that regulation is a slice of Swiss cheese necessarily, but everything else at the moment is, and again, please don't tweet the phraseology, it's not helpful, but it's an important illustration for us, is that, as we said at the beginning, the absence of patient data, patient safety data doesn't make this safe. The issue for us is we have got to layer up our levels of governance so there are no holes in our cheese so that we are able to, and regulation is one aspect of that. It is not the only aspect of it. And the biggest risk to us over the next few years is that we focus on regulation. We don't spend time on the governance. So my call to arms today is we have got to be really clear about governance as we move into these debates and discussions about regulation. In many ways, the regulation should be the icing on the cake and understand the context for us of our scope of practice, what's in, what's out, and how do we hold that piece safe. Again, please look down the list. There are so many different levels of regulation, and governance. This is such important and such difficult work. You just think about the job description phraseology there and the work with NHS employers. I know nursing have got work ongoing at the moment. We've done some bits of work, but there does need to be fundamental change. Job descriptions. A dietitian wanting to work as an advanced practitioner had to use a historical job description of decades ago because they don't have a recognisable job description to use. So some real challenges, massive challenges for the different professions and how we need to do significant housekeeping still. Having done good 5-6 years worth of housekeeping to date, we have more to do. So everybody here has a responsibility. Everybody here has to be able to undertake an aspect of the governance of what this is, right the way through from me as a registrant already. I have to declare that I am fit to practice on the basis of the work that I do. So I therefore currently am regulated right the way through to the CQC, who when they come into my organisation to ask me about the training and education of my staff, they need to have a very clear idea, and we are working and talking with the CQC to be really clear that actually when you come in, I want you to ask about advanced practice, I want you to ask about supervision, I want you to ask about their training, and I want you to ask specific questions. And now that we've got the work that the centre have done, we've got the beginnings of being able to do that. And working again with professional bodies, with colleagues already in this space to be really clear about how do we together, from a governance perspective, underpin this. And from an organisational perspective, James Pratt, who works in Nottingham, has done the most Herculean piece of work across the country, underpinning what good organisational governance looks like. And the genius of what he's done is put it into a maturity matrix, which is a very positive asset-based approach to building on organisations' knowledge and development of advanced practice. And I'm delighted to say, James will tell me off for telling you, but he's just been shortlisted for the Nursing Times Awards around patient safety on the basis of his work, which is just unbelievably wonderful. So congratulations, James and the team. Wonderful. And again, hugely co-produced. A lot of people's energy, effort and work has gone into this. Nothing we do, any of us, is in isolation. So we've got to keep anchored. What is the population health requirement here? Because that's what will drive service. That's what will drive what happens next. And that is that good governance that underpins it. As patients, as service users, as populations, we need to know that you're trained. It resounds in my head. Somebody, I think it was Alison again, said to me, it is nobody minds who's treating them until it goes wrong, and then they mind. And so it's absolutely important. And I go with my beautiful, fragile mum. I'm her carer. I can tell within 3 nanoseconds of the person I'm working with opening their mouth as to whether I'm going to trust what they're going to say or whether I'm going to pick my lovely mum up and demand to go and see somebody else, a doctor, whatever I'm socialised to need for what I'm dealing with. So it's hugely important for us that we are creating that confident, capable clinician surrounded by good governance that they can give those service users the best approach to the care and answer their needs, get people better, help people to live with whatever the requirement might be. We've got to do it brilliantly. Really important. And trusts need to be able to workforce plan. They need to have, what's the education and training I can buy? How do I train them? What do I do with them when they're trained? How do I deploy them safely? And tell me they're going to be safe. If we can establish that as part of multi-professional service teams, we can then start to help trusts workforce plan over time. So we get to the point of a production line of professional development for people moving into job roles that may be looked at across a system rather than across a one organization or across a pathway, perhaps more realistically. So incredibly important that we can get to a point of maturity and a greater level of success in filling our roles. If we're able to, then we can build that workforce planning into pre-registration supply. And that's the worry for us at the moment, is making sure as we use more people, often in more creative ways, create more different roles, we've got to be feeding the pipeline below. Servers also think they want a homogenous worker until they have one, and patients think they might like this person who can deal with all of their needs. We have a GP that is able to do that. We train them for many, many, many decades to get to that level of expertise. Many of us can do a lot of that work. However, for us, the issue is the homogenous worker. We need greater specialty. We need good generalist skills and we need specialty. And that will change in its proportion depending on where you are working, what you are doing. We need a nimble and progressive scope of practice and whole workforce solutions. Incredibly important. So we've talked about many things. I've got a few thoughts just to leave you with. We've got to pull all this challenge together. We've got to find a four-nation way through. We've got to not sit and wait for regulation. We've got to keep beavering on. Nothing changes if we decide, or if the nation decides they want to regulate advanced practice in whatever way, shape, or form that looks like. We've still got to do this governance. So we've got to keep on with it now. We've got to keep moving with all of this work. Everything still needs to be done now. And I do urge people, please keep an open mind when it comes to what happens next, because if it doesn't fit with what you think, we're going to spend our lives disappointed. We've got to understand the arguments to be able to rationalize, as the critical thinkers that we are, the reasons for why we end up where we are, and ensure that we make the most of whatever we agree happens next. Got to learn from the mistakes and the opportunities and the magic of the past. And remember, we've got workforce here who have been doing this for decades. The challenge for us in our work has been, how do we respectfully recognize that while still hold a line on a way of being? So incredibly difficult. Really, 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 really got to realize that people want to be recognized. People are tired of telling people, I am good enough. And there's the challenge of that is how we move mindsets. And again, regulation is only one part of that. So incredibly important that we are thinking through how that, and as educators, it's the educational underpinning of that we are working hard to get right. But I realize there's far more people on the call than that. We've discussed many times talking about this has got to be an enabling solution. Whatever we do, our governance, any form of regulation, titles, they have got to enable. They need to get that balance. Helen Bevan tweeted a fantastic tweet this morning about standardization versus, so creating unity and unification or something. Anyway, look at Helen Bevan's tweet from this morning. It was very, very good, saying we've got to have enough flexibility that this can be a thing, but it's got to be enough standardization that it's safe and effective for people, and then we can plan it and we can develop it. And don't forget, the advanced practice work also came out of the 5-year forward view and the new models of care, where we could not scale any workforce developments because they were not recognizable or transferable. The work happened to start to build workforce plannable workforce for the future. So I also want you to be really mindful of the fact that all the work that Sam and the team at the NMC will do is going to be bounded by the challenges and the opportunities of regulatory reform, which may mean that things change slightly. It may mean there needs to be some delay in thinking or some more progressive thinking. Amazing. But that will confound for the NMC, I would imagine, some of the opportunities that they may want to take advantage of. So let's be really mindful that this is going to be a process that's going to take a bit of time. Key for me is that we do not lose traction on what we are trying to achieve, and that we do not fail to hit the mark of what we need to do. So colleagues, I've got lots of data that I'll share with you when we share the slides with you. We've got the ability to have some conversation now, and the data will follow for you. Gosh, that's a very exciting slide change. So we're going to move into the questions, Stan, now. I've gone 3.5 minutes over, but I hope that's acceptable, Chair.